everybody. This is Mike, and today we're going to talk about bloom and the weather conditions we've been seeing. Today we have multiple guests on. We all know who Russell Harris is. Needs really no further introduction. Lewis Gill, he is the farm manager for Harris Farms. And we have Marty. Marty is from Nebraska. And Marty, could you just introduce yourself really quick and tell us kind of your credentials?
I'm a Fresno State graduate. I lived in the Valley for 58 years. I'm a certified crop advisor, a pest control advisor, licensed pest control advisor, and a licensed pest control operator. Past president of the California Beekeepers Association, on the board of directors of the California Beekeepers Association, and past president of the Central Valley Bee Association.
And you've also been a beekeeper yourself.
I've been a beekeeper for 47 years.
Okay. And,
that's impressive.
And currently, you are a bee evaluator, is that correct?
Yeah, I do bee evaluations, also known as a bee inspector. We do frame counts, and we also look at fields and tell people where the best spots are to put bees and how many hives to the acre, what kind of strength I feel are best for pollination.
And so I think bringing all of these people together, our idea is to try to explain what we've been seeing during the month of February. You know, and maybe we could start with Russell. Have you ever seen a bloom like this or weather conditions during bloom like this?
No, I don't think I've seen it quite this cold that long, and not having sun for maybe 10 days, maybe 3 hours out of a day. Yeah. I think in 95 or 96, I remember when I was living in a house in Churchill, and it snowed in end of April, first part of March, and that's about the only time I've ever seen like we've seen this year, No, it's quite interesting.
And I mean, the highs that we've seen pretty much for the month of February, maybe Lewis, you have some more information on it, but the highs have really been kind of below 55 degrees. Is that about right?
Right, yeah. I mean, I think here since the 22nd of February all the way up to, say, the 28th of February, the highest we've seen was on the 26th was like 53 degrees.
Yeah, and windy probably. Sure,
yeah. We had some light rain that day.
Yeah. And when do you think, bloom really started this year?
I'm thinking probably from the 21st. We were probably at about maybe 15 to 20%.
Yeah. Somewhere
along in there. And then, I mean, if you look now, I think we're probably about 90% bloom.
Yeah, I've been seeing petal fall in some which I don't know if that's really wind related or if you are coming out outside of bloom.
Petals are always going to fall eventually. They can't stay on forever.
Yeah, but don't you think it's towards the back end of bloom now?
I always hear people say, "Look at the petal fall." So I don't know if that has something to do with it or not. Personally, it always falls.
But okay, so let's maybe go back to bloom really started or looked like it was along its way the 21st, do you think?
Sure, and I think a lot of it happened here within the last 8 days or so.
Okay.
And we had 8 days we had bad weather.
So the 21st to the 2nd of March, you've basically started bloom and almost done with bloom. And out of that time frame, can you just rattle off some of the conditions we've had?
All right, so here the 22nd, we had a high of 51. The 23rd was a high of 52 with light rain, and then we had rain on the 22nd also. 24th, high of 51 with heavy rain. The 25th, I have a recording of 45 degrees. I think that was a Sunday. Was that a Sunday?
As the high.
As a high, yeah. And we had rain that day also. And 26 and 27, 53 degrees, and the 28th was 52.
And a lot of rain throughout those days, right? And wind.
Right, correct. Yeah, one of those days we had a lot of wind.
I noticed just one thing, just driving around. You drive around, you don't got no bees hitting your windshield as a farmer, and you don't clean your windshield. I mean, bees aren't flying. I think I only had one day they did that.
Scott and I were talking about that this morning, and you could just remember going to the gas station with those squeegees and having to clean your windshield because you were smacking so many bees. You just haven't done that this year.
Right.
So Marty, those weather conditions that he was talking about, I mean, could you reference that to bee activity?
Bee activity is going to be really low. They don't break cluster until 55 degrees.
What does that mean, break cluster?
In the hive, they all pull in tight to stay warm, and as it warms up, they move out away from each other. So the movement in the hive starts at 55 degrees. Now on the trees, you have radiant heat, so it might be 59 outside, but the bees will still work and the trees will still do something. But normally almonds don't shed any pollen until 63 degrees. Their anthers don't open up and shed the pollen for the bees to be available to the bees. So we're depending a lot on radiant heat on those flowers.
So Marty, have you had a chance to look how much pollen the bees have collected in the hives? And
We've only looked at a few hives, and they've collected some pollen early on, but they're starting to starve now, and some people are feeding them, and some people are feeding too much where the bees are plugged out, and they don't have any reason to go out and work.
have you ever seen in your 47 years of experience that they've had to feed bees during almond pollination?
In the old days when they ran 3 hives to the acre, they had to feed because there wasn't enough forage.
Yeah. Well, in the old days, they only made 800 pounds of almonds, so it might have been a lot different, I guess. I don't know how far back you're going.
So when you're looking, I know I was with you the other day, and we were opening up the top of the hive, pulling out those frames. We really didn't see any pollen, right? It was maybe old because it was from the beginning of the bloom.
Correct. There was no fresh pollen.
Right. So now I think we're going to be looking at maybe a few good days of bee pollination. I mean, how's that going to play out, do you think?
Hopefully it'll play out well, but the flowers are getting old, and
Right.
typically an almond flower is viable for 72 hours after it opens under ideal conditions.
And you have some pictures that you might want to just talk through a little bit.
Yeah, if you look at the screen, you'll see that there's some yellow, and then there's some discolored and deformed, underdeveloped pollen anthers on that flower, so the pollen isn't available. Even if we get warm weather and it starts to shed pollen, there's a reduced amount of pollen, and we're not sure what the quality is going to be.
What makes it undeveloped? Just the temperatures?
I'm thinking the temperatures. I've never seen this before in 47 years of looking at these. I've never seen that kind of development. It's always been all yellow, and I don't know. If you look in the bottom corner, that's more typical of what you should see.
I think this year's going to be interesting. I mean, one thing we'll find out of how good these self-pollinating varieties really are.
Right.
You know, because
The self-fertile varieties, right?
yeah. Well,
that's
they're
right.
self-pollinating. You know? Are they I guess it's the same
No.
thing.
Yeah.
Well, pollination is the transfer of pollen from the stamen to the pistil. So to be self-fertile, they still have to get that pollen transferred from the stamen to the pistil.
Can
Now
you
you'll
show
have
us
beetles
what that is
and
that you're
flies.
talking about? I mean, will you be able to zoom in on one of those to show us you can zoom in there and maybe show us a
Yeah.
little bit better.
I'm not seeing the pistils real
But
well
you were
in
saying,
this.
maybe you could start with the anthers you were
Well,
talking.
we could go back. We have
Just to give a little bit of knowledge of what we're...
that's what we want to see. Okay, here's one. The pistil is in the center. I think it's a light green. I'm colorblind also, so
Yeah, it's right above that leaf. I see it.
Yeah.
yeah. And the pollen has to get from the anther, which are the yellow parts, and then that slightly green that looks like a tube is your pistil, and you have to get the pollen to the pistil. Then it has to germinate and grow down the pistil tube to fertilize the nut.
Pollen's much like semen, you know, as far as a human, right? It has to
Correct.
get in the area it's got to swim up to. It's got to swim all the way to the egg and then pollinate itself. But if it's cold, it takes longer to get there. So if it's 65 degrees, it may take a few hours versus a few days. And my opinion is if once it gets in that stamen, is it called the stamen, where the pollen goes down, or the pistil?
The pistil.
The pistil. And if it sits there for 10 days or 7 days being cold, I think it's going to have a whole much harder to impregnate that
Well,
egg.
yeah,
And,
you got 72 hours. So if it's sitting there for 10 days in the cold, it's
well, there you go.
it's no longer viable.
There
So
you
even
go.
maybe the pollination that happened on the front end of the bloom was
Right.
kind of stalled out or didn't even really fertilize the almond because it got too cold and took too
Correct.
long.
Typically, we have almond blossom around the 14th. We started moving bees in on the 11th, and the reason I know that is it's my parents' wedding anniversary.
Oh,
So we'd start moving bees. By the 23rd, which was my mother's birthday, we had full bloom on the old Neo Plus.
Yeah.
So those are the dates that stick in my mind. And this year, I've seen in '83 we had the rains, but those were in March.
What kind of crop reduction do you think you would guess that it was going to be? We're not knowing what's coming the next couple of days.
It's a wild guess, but I would think that it's probably going to be 50%.
Wow.
I
don't disagree with you. I was out having dinner with some guy last night, Daryl Vincent, my friend, and he said, let's put a number, I'll make a bet. And I said, well, I'll bet you 2.2. And he says, that's a good number. So then I went to 2 billion. He says, I'll take the over. So I think this year is going to be a shocker no matter what comes. It could be bigger than you think, and it could be a lot lower than people think. But I think this year is going to be a shocking year because one will realize, hey, maybe you don't need as many bees as you think, or you should have put a lot more bees because you had a limited time to fly.
Correct.
And that's the other unique thing about this year is there's way less hives in the valley.
Well, that might be because the farmers didn't want them because prices were, $1.20 or something. They didn't bring them in,
Correct, but still there's less at the bottom.
Actually, for the almond business, I think this is the worst thing that can happen. I think you're better off having a 2.6 or 2.8 crop. You have a lot of people on the west side now that were going to push trees out that aren't going to push trees out. So, the production keeps rolling along. You had a wet winter, so all the areas that had water problems are going to keep irrigating. So I think next year's crop could be, who knows, 3.2.
The 24 crop.
The 24 crop could be huge.
And some of the west side guys put 3 hives to the acre, hedging on the water what they were going to get.
Yeah. Well, you were mentioning the other day that a grower brought hives in the field that he was going to push because now they did have water.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, just last week.
Yeah. I don't know.
I think what we do know is that this is pretty historic. Really can't relate back to any other year that you've seen this type of weather at this time for so long.
And this late in the season. Because we're in March, and the Butte Padres may do okay. I don't think they've even bloomed yet. Hardly.
Yeah, what do you see, Liz?
I think they're going now. Just now, probably barely.
Yeah.
The Buttes are ahead for sure.
How about that Wood Colony?
Yeah, Wood Colony was late for sure.
Yep. But your Nonpareil, Monterey, Fritz, that's pretty much on the backside of bloom now. Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Pretty much.
100%.
And I think in those early days, probably like I got it down here, like from the 15th to about the 19th, we're probably about 10%, 12% bloom.
Yep.
And the nonpareils probably, got pollinated pretty well during those stages. But you weren't that far advanced.
Yeah.
Well, I think that if you are a guy to farm to stress orchard or have Nemigards, those were out. But if you plant hybrids like we've been planting a lot, those weren't blooming at that time. I don't think.
Yeah, very little.
Yeah.
For sure.
But what about that early portion of the bloom? Did you see it was just the nonpareil, or do you see the nonpareil and the Monterey blooming at the same time?
You've seen some, but for sure the nonpareil was ahead.
Yeah.
If you go back to what Marty's saying, that if you go back to early pollinization, right? Okay, we agree there was some pollen, but it wasn't warm enough to transfer the pollen to the egg to be sure it got impregnated or whatever you want to call it.
That grain never grew, right?
Well, we don't know. We'll find out in about 60 days. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the radiant heat comes in. Did we get enough radiant heat, or was it cloudy and overcast?
I think radiant heat could be, if you're under a cloud, no, it's not going to work. But if you happen to be on the west side or where the sun comes down, that particular grower may have got more radiant heat, where the bees may have flown for a couple hours and
the pollen may have germinated.
Right. Yeah. This is unprecedented. Have you ever seen a year like this?
I've never, and I think we're going to learn a lot this year.
Yeah.
About how many bees do we really need per acre, and.
Well, it's interesting. Typically, when it gets cold in the past, it gets like 28 or 29 in the morning, but then the daytime it'll get above 60. Right. So there was always some bee activity. But we've had actually no bee activity for almost 10 days, right? 10 days. Starving bees. Someone's got to feed them. This is, Marty, like I said, I wouldn't be shocked if it's under 2 billion pounds, and it might be scary for a lot of people, especially for the buyers, but I wouldn't shock me at all,
It wouldn't shock me either.
What do you think, Lewis?
Yeah, 2 billion.
Would you go above if there was money on it today?
I don't know. It's a good one.
You, Fenn?
I don't bet anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know.
Well, I think the almond industry is always interesting. It's going to be fun. I think we're coming off a tough year of low pricing, and about the worst thing you do for a grower is not make a crop, and then the prices go back up high, right? And we can't get our shipments, and then have another big crop. So it's going to be interesting marketing here for all that, and maybe the crop is not as bad as we think. Maybe it comes out 2.4, which would be a shocker, but. Right now, I'd bet below that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Either way, there's going to be a lot of volatility, most likely in the future. So.
I mean, how about the guys up north that got snowed on? I don't know how many acres that was.
Yeah, I don't know.
That was running around.
My friend Rob Reamer up there has land up there, in not south of Redding. I forget. If it's Red Bluff or somewhere up there. He thought he had a really good crop early on because they were bloomed earlier than us. He was telling me that, so he was happy. But he was saying, no, I don't know about going through all this cold we've been going through.
They should have had a good crop because they were down about 50% in the 22, so they were primed for it. But
yeah, well, up north it's always tough to make a big crop. It's just don't have the weather, not the warmth.
You guys got anything else you want to add?
The other thing is usually you have an extended bloom, and if you can get 8 hours of good pollination over the whole bloom, you're in good shape. But this year we've only had a day here and a day there,
right?
And the trees don't bloom all at once.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a big...
Probably with the sun coming up today and tomorrow, the blooms that are on a non-problem monitor, they're going to pop, I would think, fast.
I would think, because they're wanting to go. Mm-hmm. They're at the gate wanting to go. And if they get a warm day, it's going to be all or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think as this progresses, we'll continue to keep everybody informed with what we know, or at least what we think.
What we think we know.
What we think we know.
And we don't know much, but we think we know.
Our best guesstimate.
Yeah. Well, unless you guys have anything else to add.
Well, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you, Marty.
Thanks
for helping us, our family. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you for
And if people want to get a hold of you, Marty, is there a website they should go to or a email?
Just a phone number.
All right.
559-285-6840.
Marty the bee inspector.
Yeah, we'll put it on the podcast.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Adios, amigo.
Thank you.